"My dear, this room belongs to you now," my mother said to my sister. Her cold voice cut through the quiet of the late afternoon. Then she turned to me and said, "You'll be staying in the basement. Your sister is going through a hard time." My name is Sierra. I am 27 years old working as an IT engineer. For as long as I can remember, I have always been the second choice in my own home, but this sudden eviction pushed me past my breaking point. Without even looking at me, my sister walked right into my bedroom. She didn't just claim the space, she tore through my personal belongings to make the room her own. She pulled my clothes off the hangers and carelessly threw everything I owned onto the hardwood floor. My carefully organized life was suddenly a pile of trash at her feet. I didn't scream. I didn't cry or throw a tantrum. Instead, I quietly bent down and started picking up my scattered things. They thought my silence meant submission. They thought I was just going to pack up and accept a miserable life down in that damp, dark basement. But they had no idea what I was about to do next. This was only the beginning of a plan they never saw coming. If this story resonates with your heart, or if you have ever been stripped of everything by your own family, please support this video with a like and subscribe to the channel. Your opinion is very important to me, so do not hesitate to share your thoughts in the comments. Enjoy the story. The cold cement floor rubbed against my knees as I gathered the mess of belongings just thrown into the corner of the basement. I spent the rest of that first night organizing a makeshift living space out of the dust and shadows. I set up a heavy folding table against the concrete wall, carefully hooking up my dual monitors and server equipment to create a fully functional IT workspace. About 3 weeks passed slowly since I moved down into this new cramped area. I settled into a very quiet routine, purposefully leaving early for the office and returning late just to avoid crossing paths with anyone upstairs. Soon, I started noticing strange signs around my workspace. My personal items were definitely not where I left them. First, a silver necklace disappeared from my small jewelry box. Then I realized my expensive smartwatch was completely missing from the charging dock on my desk. I never caught Carmen in the act, but these valuable items only vanished during the hours I was away at work. It was impossible to ignore the distinct pattern even though I did not have concrete proof of her taking them yet. I decided to test the waters upstairs to see their reaction. I found Mom sitting in the kitchen casually reading a magazine. "Mom, have you seen the smartwatch on my desk?" I asked calmly, keeping my voice completely even. She immediately slammed the magazine down on the table, her face tightening with instant defensiveness. "You always leave your things in a huge mess and then turn around to accuse other people," Mom snapped, raising her voice to protect Carmen before I even mentioned her name. "Your sister barely leaves her room. Stop being so selfish and calculating all the time." I realized arguing with her was a complete waste of breath. I turned around and walked straight back down the stairs without saying another word. Back at my desk, I let out a long breath and looked up at a framed photograph sitting right next to my monitors. It was a picture of my grandfather Eugene. Looking at his gentle smile, I clearly remembered the strict instruction he gave me right before he passed away. He held my hand tightly and told me to never let anyone force me out of this house. I was absolutely not going to let his life's work be taken over by people who treated me like dirt. I needed a logical solution, not an emotional argument. The next day at the technology firm, I spent my lunch break browsing online stores for miniature security cameras. My colleague Brody walked past my cubicle and noticed the security devices on my screen. He stopped and asked what I was looking for. I gave him a brief explanation of the missing items without going into the heavy family drama. "I actually have a spare set of mini cameras sitting in my drawer that I never use," Brody offered immediately. "You can borrow them if you need to monitor your desk while you are out." I thanked him and took the small, unassuming black boxes home that evening. I waited until midnight to secretly install the tiny camera. I mounted it perfectly in the top corner of the basement ceiling, angling the lens to cover my entire bed and workspace. Once the video feed was securely connected to my private server, my attention shifted to the main floor. I started thinking about the old security system installed years ago. Mom always assumed the main DVR hard drive in the utility closet was completely broken. As an IT engineer, I knew hardware rarely died without leaving recoverable traces. I made a mental note to inspect that storage drive closely to see what hidden footage it still held. The third Saturday morning started with the loud thud of frantic footsteps echoing from the second floor down into my basement workspace. Mom spent over 30 agonizing minutes tearing her master bedroom apart, creating a massive commotion. I could clearly hear heavy drawers slamming shut and large pieces of furniture scraping against the hardwood floorboards upstairs. Eventually, her frustrated voice rang out across the hallway, strictly demanding that everyone gather in the main living room immediately. I paused. My system configuration walked up the stairs and found both of them already standing by the sofa. Mom was pacing back and forth across the rug, her hands trembling visibly as she announced that her most expensive diamond necklace had completely vanished without a trace. "I swear I left it right on my vanity table yesterday evening. How could it just magically disappear?" Mom said in a complete panic. She stopped her frantic pacing and deliberately turned her head, staring directly at me with eyes full of harsh, undeniable judgment. The heavy accusation hung in the silent room. I kept my posture perfectly straight and my face entirely neutral, refusing to take the obvious bait or defend myself against an unstated charge. That was the exact moment Carmen decided to take control of the narrative. She stepped forward with her hands raised perfectly, playing the role of the deeply concerned and cooperative daughter. "We need to clear this up right now so nobody feels suspicious of anyone else. Let's just search every single room in the entire house together," Carmen suggested quickly. It sounded like a fair and transparent idea on the surface, but her immediate eagerness gave her true intentions away. She was not trying to prove her own innocence. She was actively steering the entire investigation straight toward my new living space. Mom agreed to the plan instantly. They barely spent 2 minutes glancing around Carmen's spotless upstairs bedroom before marching directly toward the basement door. They descended the wooden stairs with sudden aggressive purpose. I followed closely behind them in absolute silence, carefully watching their coordinated moves. Once they stepped into my cramped IT workspace, Carmen immediately took the lead. She completely bypassed the obvious personal areas like my neatly made bed or my open clothing rack. Instead, she walked straight toward the heavy folding table holding my dual monitors and server equipment. She reached directly for a large, opaque plastic storage bin where I systematically kept my spare computer cables and networking gear. She dug her hands deep into the tangled wires, pushing aside thick Ethernet cords and bulky power adapters with highly calculated precision. She did not bother checking anywhere else. Moments later, she pulled out a small, unfamiliar black velvet pouch hidden securely at the bottom corner. She quickly pulled the drawstring open, letting the unmistakable sparkle of diamonds catch the dim overhead basement light. "Isn't this your missing diamond necklace, Mom? Why is it hiding inside her equipment box?" Carmen exclaimed loudly, shifting her triumphant, piercing gaze directly onto me. I stood completely frozen in shock for about 3 seconds, my mind racing to process the sheer audacity of the setup. The blatant framing left me temporarily speechless as I stared at the expensive jewelry dangling from her fingers. However, as I looked closely at my sister's face, I noticed the corner of her lips twitching upward into a very faint, deeply satisfied smirk. Clarity hit me instantly. This was never a random theft or a simple misunderstanding over misplaced items. It was a perfectly executed trap meticulously designed by my own family to frame me, giving them the ultimate justification to permanently throw me out of the house. 2 hours after that terrible searching act, a crumpled piece of scratch paper was thrown directly down the dull wooden stairs. It bounced a few times before landing right in front of my server rack. I walked over to the bottom step and picked up the paper, carefully smoothing out the deep wrinkles to read the messy handwriting. It was a formal ultimatum written by Mom, stating clearly that I had exactly 3 days to pack all my belongings and leave the house permanently. If I failed to comply with her strict deadline, she promised to officially call the police and press criminal charges against me for grand theft. The threat was explicit, calculating, and designed to force me into a panicked retreat. I did not rush upstairs to argue, nor did I show any signs of fear. Instead, I calmly walked up to the main floor, where they were still sitting together on the sofa, quietly discussing their apparent victory. "I am not going anywhere until everything is cleared up," I stated clearly, maintaining steady eye contact with both of them. Before either of them could formulate a response or start another screaming match, I put on my heavy winter coat, grabbed my car keys from the hook by the door, and walked straight out, leaving them staring after me in absolute stunned silence. I got into my vehicle and drove directly to a quiet, nearly empty coffee shop located in downtown Madison. I ordered a simple black coffee, sat down at a small corner table by the window, and took a long breath to process the entire sequence of the morning's events. I needed a flawless, airtight strategy to handle this betrayal. This train of thought quickly reminded me of an incredibly important legal file securely stored inside my personal safe deposit box at a local bank branch just a few blocks away. That hidden document was a quitclaim deed my grandfather had secretly executed and legally transferred entirely into my name several years ago. He had explicitly set up this transfer to bypass standard probate procedures, ensuring that I would always have a permanent roof over my head, regardless of any future family disputes. I always knew the certified document existed and diligently kept the maintenance fees paid on the bank box every year, but I never actually thought I would have to use it as a weapon against my own mother and sister. Holding the warm coffee cup in both hands, the immense reality of the situation fully settled in my logical mind. I realized I was holding the absolute strongest legal weapon possible in this exact scenario. Mom and Carmen were confidently issuing ultimatums and acting like the masters of the property, completely unaware that they were currently residing on real estate that legally belonged to me alone. A sudden rush of clarity replaced my initial shock, but I immediately suppressed the strong urge to drive back and throw the deed right in their faces. Revealing my ultimate trump card right now would be a massive tactical mistake. It would only give them an opportunity to fabricate new lies, destroy my remaining personal property in the basement, or attempt some desperate legal maneuver to stall an inevitable eviction process. I made a firm, calculated decision to keep my ownership a complete secret for just a few more days. I needed to gather undeniable concrete video evidence of their setup, first guaranteeing they would have absolutely no room left to deny their malicious actions or reverse the situation when I finally struck back. Late Saturday night, when the heavy footsteps upstairs had completely faded into absolute silence, I finally booted up my primary computer system. I quietly stepped out of the basement and walked over to the dusty utility closet located in the main hallway. I carefully unscrewed the metal casing of the old DVR unit belonging to our home security system. Mom always ignored this bulky machine, fully convinced that it had stopped working several years ago after a minor power surge. She never bothered to unplug the main power supply or check the internal electronic components. I smoothly detached the internal SATA hard drive, wrapped it securely in an anti-static bag, and carried it back down to my server rack without making a single sound. Using my professional IT equipment, I connected the dusty drive directly to my workstation using a specialized data adapter. I immediately launched a standard high-level data recovery program. I needed to meticulously scan through the fragmented storage partitions to locate any overwritten or seemingly deleted video files from the past month. The blue progress bar moved slowly across my dual monitors, processing thousands of corrupted sectors block by block. The quiet hum of my server cooling fans filled the cold basement as I waited patiently for the software to rebuild the entire broken file directory from scratch. I watched the scanning screen intently, remembering a specific conversation I had at the tech firm last year. As long as the hard drive isn't physically damaged, the data is still there. Brody once explained to me while we were discussing complex file restoration protocols. His professional advice proved absolutely correct tonight. The lengthy scanning process finally concluded after nearly 2 hours of tense waiting. The software presented a long list of recovered media files. I successfully extracted a crystal-clear video file captured by the upstairs hallway camera. I clicked play and watched the undeniable proof unfold on my high-resolution screen. The security footage clearly showed Carmen sneaking out of Mom's master bedroom. She was holding the glittering diamond necklace tightly in her right hand, looking around the empty corridor cautiously before silently making her way down the wooden stairs toward my basement workspace. Next, I accessed the separate video feed from the miniature security camera Brody had lent me. I meticulously synchronized the digital timestamps on both video players to match the hallway footage perfectly. The hidden mini camera captured Carmen standing right next to my heavy folding table. It recorded her exact, calculated movements as she deliberately shoved the black velvet pouch deep inside my plastic storage box, filled with spare computer cables. She even spent an extra minute rearranging the thick Ethernet wires on top to completely hide her tracks. These two combined video angles provided a complete unbroken chain of visual evidence, proving her malicious setup without a single shadow of a doubt. I did not need to rely on any questionable audio recordings or violate any state wiretapping laws to build my solid case against them. The high-definition visual proof alone was devastatingly conclusive. I compiled all the extracted video clips into a single highly organized digital folder on my desktop. I immediately encrypted the entire package with a complex, alphanumeric security key to prevent any unauthorized access. I uploaded multiple backup copies to my private secure cloud storage accounts over a virtual private network. Just to be absolutely safe, I transferred another exact duplicate onto a portable offline flash drive that I slipped securely into my jacket pocket. I safely disconnected the hardware, carefully reinstalled the original hard drive back into the hallway DVR to avoid raising any immediate suspicion, and shut down my dual monitors. I was now fully prepared for the final confrontation. On Tuesday evening, exactly at the final deadline of the written ultimatum, I casually walked up the stairs to the main living room, carrying my laptop securely under my arm. Mom and Carmen were already sitting together with their arms crossed tightly on the comfortable sofa. They were eagerly waiting for me to surrender the front door keys, radiating an incredibly smug attitude. They were fully convinced that their malicious master plan to completely remove me from the house was a massive success. "Are you done packing your suitcases yet? Where are the house keys?" Carmen asked sharply. She lifted her chin with a highly triumphant expression clearly visible on her face the second she saw me step into the room. I did not answer her arrogant question immediately. I walked purposefully past the sofa directly toward the main entertainment center. "I strongly advise you to watch this specific video before you decide whether or not to actually call the police," I said in an icy, razor-sharp tone. I pulled a long HDMI cable from behind the wooden cabinet and plugged it directly from my laptop into the large television mounted on the wall. I pressed the play button without saying another word. The high-definition security footage instantly illuminated the large screen in the dim room. It clearly showed Carmen sneaking down the basement stairs, looking around cautiously, and deliberately hiding the black velvet pouch deep inside my plastic storage box. Every single calculated movement she made was captured flawlessly. The undeniable visual evidence played loudly, instantly breaking the tense silence of the living room. The extreme arrogance radiating from both of them shattered into pieces. Carmen's triumphant smirk dropped completely from her mouth. All the color drained rapidly from her cheeks, leaving her looking sickly and terribly pale. Mom gripped the edge of the sofa cushion so hard her knuckles turned white, her eyes wide with absolute uncontrolled panic as their carefully constructed secret was abruptly exposed in clear, unarguable detail. I quickly unplugged the cable, closed my laptop screen securely, and turned around to face them. I did not waste my breath screaming, crying, or demanding an emotional apology for their terrible betrayal. Furthermore, I certainly did not try to force them to write out a ridiculous, dramatic written confession on a random piece of paper. Instead, I established immediate, concrete legal dominance over the entire situation. I clearly informed both of them that multiple encrypted copies of this exact footage were already safely backed up on secure remote servers across different locations. I stated in a perfectly calm, authoritative voice that the digital files were fully prepared and ready to be transferred directly to my personal attorney and the local Madison Police Department with a single mouse click. I watched them swallow hard, realizing they were completely trapped by their own terrible actions. I stood tall and presented my final civil settlement terms directly to their pale, frightened faces. I gave them two very clear, non-negotiable options to choose from tonight. They could either voluntarily pack their personal belongings, leave this specific property immediately, and legally commit to never harassing me again in the future. If they refused that generous offer, they would inevitably face severe life-altering criminal charges for grand theft, framing an innocent person, and felony extortion due to their written threat. They had tried to use the law to intimidate me, but now the very same legal system was hanging directly over their heads. The incredibly heavy, suffocating silence in the room confirmed they completely understood the devastating legal gravity of their failed trap. Neither Mom nor Carmen dared to make eye contact with me, their previous bravado entirely replaced by the crushing reality of their situation. Exactly at 11 o'clock at night, as the security footage finally ended on the large television screen, the air inside the living room became suffocatingly tight. The crushing reality of the criminal charges temporarily stunned them into complete silence. However, Mom quickly tried to regain her usual dominance. She stood up abruptly, puffing her chest out to use her traditional parental authority to threaten me into submission. She pointed her index finger directly at my face, preparing to launch into a loud, aggressive tirade about respect and family hierarchy to forcefully regain control of the narrative. Before she could utter a single aggressive word, I reached inside my jacket pocket. I pulled out the thick manila envelope, extracted the original notarized quitclaim deed, and tossed it directly onto the center of the glass coffee table. The heavy, crisp paper slid across the smooth surface and stopped right in front of them. "This house belonged to your grandfather. You have absolutely no right to kick me out." Mom yelled desperately, trying to cling to her last crumbling piece of authority as she glared at the official legal document. "My name is on the legal ownership papers," I replied in a completely decisive tone. "You can voluntarily walk out that front door right now, or wait for me to file a formal eviction and have the police escort you off my property." Mom leaned forward and snatched the thick document from the glass table. Carmen immediately crowded next to her shoulder, scanning the printed paragraphs with wide, terrified eyes. As soon as they saw my grandfather's verified signature, the official county seal, and the clear legal language establishing my sole ownership, their remaining defiance completely vanished. The notarized document proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that the property was entirely mine. They instantly realized they had absolutely zero legal basis to remain on this real estate. Their ultimate plan to frame and remove me had just backfired in the most catastrophic way possible. They stood frozen in the middle of the room, rapidly weighing their extremely limited options. If they stubbornly refused to leave and forced me to initiate a formal civil lawsuit, they would undoubtedly lose everything in court. Furthermore, actively fighting an eviction process would force me to hand the undeniable video evidence of their malicious diamond setup over to the local authorities immediately. The immediate threat of facing severe jail time and permanent criminal records for grand theft vastly outweighed their stubborn pride. They simply had no other viable choice left but to voluntarily yield to my strict demands to avoid total financial and personal ruin. Without uttering another word of protest or attempting any further psychological manipulation, Mom dropped the deed back onto the coffee table. Both women turned around in absolute defeat and walked heavily toward their respective bedrooms on the second floor to gather their things. I stood firmly in the hallway, crossing my arms and listening carefully as they hastily packed their most essential personal items, expensive clothes and basic toiletries, into a few large suitcases. The chaotic sounds of heavy wooden drawers opening, plastic hangers scraping aggressively against the closet rods, and tight zippers closing echoed through the silent house. The entire packing process took less than 45 minutes of tense, uninterrupted silence. Carmen dragged her heavy luggage down the wooden stairs first, struggling with the weight, followed closely by Mom, who stubbornly refused to make any eye contact with me as she passed by. They lumbered silently out the front door, pulling their rolling bags loudly down the long concrete driveway. I stood on the front porch with my arms still crossed and watched them frantically call a local taxi service from their cell phones. They stood shivering together in the freezing pitch-black night, completely exposed to the harsh winter wind, waiting miserably on the cold sidewalk until a yellow cab finally arrived to take them away from my property forever. 2 years after that stormy night, my life has finally transitioned into a completely different and remarkably peaceful trajectory. I have renovated the entire property left by my grandfather Eugene into a modern and comfortable home while achieving significant career growth as an IT engineer, finally enjoying a life free from the suffocating manipulation of those I once called family. As for Mom and Carmen, the crushing financial consequences of their greedy choices arrived much faster than they could have ever anticipated. Because they had ruined their credit scores and possessed absolutely no stable assets to provide as security, they found themselves repeatedly rejected by every landlord they approached in the city. They were eventually forced into a desperate cycle of living out of cheap transient motels, constantly moving from one miserable location to another because they could not afford a long-term lease. They are currently trapped in a deep spiral of recurring debt, working multiple low-income service jobs just to scrape together enough money to pay for their basic living expenses in this incredibly expensive economy. This is a very real and bitter price they are paying for the path of exploitation they chose to follow instead of working hard to build their own lives. Looking back on this entire ordeal, there are several harsh but necessary truths that I feel compelled to share with all of you today. The first lesson is that sharing the same bloodline is never an absolute guarantee of kindness or loyalty, and you have every right to permanently disconnect from any relationship that consistently poisons your well-being. The second vital point is that maintaining meticulous legal documentation and gathering solid objective evidence will always serve you far better than engaging in emotional arguments based purely on feelings. Finally, please understand that showing mercy toward manipulators who have already demonstrated their malicious intent only provides them with another golden opportunity to trample on your dignity and your future. I truly appreciate everyone who has taken the time to listen to my story from the very beginning until this final moment. Your support and willingness to hear my experience mean a great deal to me. After hearing about everything that happened, do you genuinely believe that my decision to handle this situation through legal channels was the right path? Or do you feel it might have been too harsh given our family history? Please leave a comment below to share your honest perspective on how you would have reacted in my place, because I am very curious to hear your thoughts. Thank you for your kindness, and I look forward to seeing you all again in my next video.